Welcome back to my YouTube Chanel Auto World Zone with plenty of new and updated touring motorcycles on the market for 2025. Well, here we go with our pick of the bunch in price order, ascending, kicking us off at the more affordable end of the market. We've got Triumph's brilliant Tiger Sports 660, which might not look vastly different year over year, but actually under the covers it gets quite a few nice little upgrades. You see the sweet 660 inline triple remains the same at 80 horsepower peak, as does the chassis, which was already very good in terms of handling, but it's the package that does get some attention, with plenty of new features now fitted as standard. For a start, there's cruise control, which is an absolute must for me on a bike like this, and they've also added an inertial measurement unit which now gives you cornering ABS on top of the existing switchable traction control. You got a new sport riding mode, which is a very welcome addition, with the existing two modes of road and rain being very approachable, but maybe lacking a little bit of snap if you wanted to get a move on. And as if that weren't already enough, for 2025, the quick shifter accessory and the Bluetooth connectivity module both now come fitted as standard, which is, that's got to be more than 500 quid saved if you were thinking about speccing them up. So look at 995. It is about 500 quid more than when it launched a couple of years back, but given what you're now getting in terms of features and all the little things that they've added, well, I don't think it looks too bad at all, although you might want to reserve another 100 quid for the Rower green paint job, which I think looks absolutely awesome, and that's also new for 2025. Thing is though, if you are eyeing up a Tiger Sports 660, then this next bike is going to look very tempting, with an 800cc version that's new for 2025. Now admittedly it is a couple of gram more than the 660 version, but with a good 30 horsepower more on tap, it's going to make it quite appealing for a couple of reasons. One is pretty obvious in that it's going to be a much quicker bike, but two is that if you are thinking of going two in and you like to ride two open with luggage, then 113 horsepower peak sounds much more appropriate for that kind of work. In fact, there are plenty of reasons why I think this bike will be better to up, like the fact that you got more adjustability in the suspension with compression and rebound on the fork, preload and rebound on the shock, and that's as opposed to just preload only on the shock of the 660 bike. Then when you've got more mass on the bike, a bit more stopping power is always going to be welcome, especially if it's a faster bike too, and so the upgrade Ed Triumph branded radial calipers definitely look like a good addition, as does the fact that you get a little more wind protection courtesy of the slightly bigger fare. In so clearly, Alan, I'd expect this to be a much more accomplished tour, especially if you load it up, and it's one of the bikes that I'm most looking forward to reviewing this year, so do keep your eyes peeled if you want to see that video as soon as it goes live. I will say, though, there are some other great alternatives in this part of the market in this sort of price bracket too, like the F900XR from BMW, which is another one that hasn't changed a great deal visually, but does have a few tweaks to the spec, which keep it fresh for the new Model G and hopefully just liven it up a bit. The wheels, for example, they've shed 8 kg between them, so that should give you quicker changes in direction, and they've also upgraded the fork on this one with full adjustability, with the previous generation being completely non-adjustable. Then you've got more tech with lean sensitive abs and traction control, and adaptive headlight, ASP socket and heated grips all fitted as standard now, and the aerodynamics have also been revised for a little more comfort on the motorway. They say that the new shape of the windscreen reduces pressure and buffer in on the rider, and also of course the standard fit handguards do give you a bit less chill on your fingers. On top of all that, though, they've added an acrop-ofic exhaust accessory that wasn't available for the previous generation, and also a couple of fancy new paint jobs. But I think the main consideration when trying to choose between a bike like this and the Tiger, for example, is the vastly different engine character, with the one being a parallel twin with a 270 degrees crank that might be preferable to some people to the inline triple for me, though well, I absolutely love the flexibility of an inline triple with all that mid-range and usable torque while still retaining a bit of revi-top-end fun that makes for a super versatile ride that I think perfectly suits the intended use of a sports tour like this. That's why, though, I think it's going to be a really tough call between the new Tiger Sport 800 and then one of the proven performers in this market, which is the Tracer 9 from Yamaha. Both the triples both come in around the same price point as well, and so both look like great options for 2025, with the Tracer also getting plenty of updates to its 3-model lineup. You've still got the base model, which now gets cornering headlights and a massively improved 7-in TFT display along with revised switchgear and some styling tweaks, whereas the 14000 GT version, and get some hard luggage on top of that: electronic suspension, an electronic windscreen, heated grips, keyless ignition, and phone connectivity fitted as standard. If however you're willing to pay top dollar, then the GT Plus version at 17000 is the flagship model, and this one gets their most advanced tech with front and rear radars that open up adaptive cruise control and blind spot warnings specifically for 2025. Though both of these more premium variants get a really revised front end that's built to accommodate what they say is the first Matrix LED headlight to ever be fitted to a motorcycle. Now, we'll say it might not be a lucker. In fact, it's quite a difficult bike to get on with visually now, but it should give you incredible visibility at night with a link to the bike's inertial measurement unit to feed and lean angles, so it's adaptive and illuminates the inside of a turn, but then also data from a built-in camera. This gives it a view of the surrounding traffic, the levels of light, and also what the weather conditions are doing, and so it should be able to give you the perfect lighting for any given scenario. Now, given that this is a first for a motorcycle, it's certainly something I'm really interested to try out. But then there's also the option now for both these bikes to spec up their new YT system or automated manual transmission. Essentially, it replaces the clutch lever and foot shifter with electronic actuators, and so that means you can run the bike in an automatic mode, or you can put it in manual and then simply choose your own gears with the buttons on the switchgear. Really, now in the Tracer 9 lineup, you've got such a wide spectrum of prices and specs, so there should be something to suit all budgets and taste, from effectively what's still a good simple sports tourer right up to something that's absolutely dripping in all the latest tech. At least that's the case in Europe anyway, because on the US website it's just the base model listed, I'm afraid, although I got to say it is still absolutely fantastic bike. Now, before we get on to the next bike, I just want to say a massive thanks to DJI for supporting the channel and making videos like this one possible. If you're considering one of these touring bikes for 2025, then there's a good chance you'll be off on some adventures and tours, and so I'd wholeheartedly recommend DJI's Osmo action cameras as the perfect way to capture the experience and either record it for yourself for looking back on in years to come, or for sharing your journey with your friends and family through social. Here at Motbob, we use both their Osmo Action 4 and OS Action 5 Pro, both of which are absolutely brilliant cameras, being very slim and light, so they're easy to carry around, but also they don't weight your helmet too much. If you do decide to mount it on the chin, the image quality is absolutely top drawer, as well the stabilization super steady. And then one of my favorite things about them, certainly with the 5 Pro, is that the battery life is second to none, and so you're never going to miss any of those key memorable moments. Now, we've got a full rundown of each of those cameras, so I'll link to those down in the description, along with some links to the website where you can find out more. So once again, a massive thanks to DJI for their support. And with that, on to the next bike. Now, Kawasaki's Versys TH000 has been a solid performer for many years now, but 2025 brings a bit of a refresh with more capacity and a new name. So big inline 4 goes from 1043cc up to $199. And with it, for this particular bike, you get a substantial hike in peak power, so it goes from 118 on the previous generation to a rather handy 133. Now, on top of that, they say there's also more torque in the mid-range. Gearing is revised too, and the quick shifter, which comes as standard on the premium S and SC versions, has been refined, so it now operates lowering the revs elsewhere. The bike is largely the same as the previous generation. The looks, the chassis, the ergonomics are all pretty much unchanged, but given that it was already a fairly popular bike, it was a good formula. Perhaps Kawasaki are hoping that that headline horsepower increase is enough to keep it as a good seller, or I guess the other option that you could go with from the Kawasaki lineup is much more of a sports tourer in the form of the new F2025 Ninja 1100SX for just $350. More than the Versys, you get a lighter, lower slung fed bike with a more aggressive riding position that clearly is going to make it the better choice if you want to go quick while still retaining enough comfort to cover some distance. Now for 2025, they actually sherried that 1100 inline 4 with exact same state of tune now, and so while the Versys actually got that really nice bumping peak power, this one is actually a handful of horses down still. That blow might have been softened ever so slightly for anyone considering a Ninja 1100SX, because for the first time it'll be available in a more premium S-Speak, which gets you some rather nice looking Brembos up front and an upgraded Öhlins shock on the rear over at Honda, though for similar money we've got the NT100, which is a super solid, comfortable touring bike that's built upon the Africa Twin platform. It was launched a couple of years back, and I got to say I was generally impressed, although it did have a couple of little quirks and niggles that certainly needed ironing out. Thankfully for 2025, they seem to have got them all sorted, with bigger side cases, for example, that can now take a helmet, and the windscreen is now easier to adjust, with the previous generation being a bit awkward. It was so stiff that you had to pretty much get off the bike and move it with both hands, whereas on this new 2025 bike, I believe it's adjustable with a single hand, so you can just make quick changes on the fly. On top of that, as well as being available with their DCD automatic box, it now gets their ease version, or electronic suspension, which I guess carries over a similar shower semi-active system to the one found on the Africa Twin. For me, this is absolutely perfect for this style of bike where you want that versatility of suspension that's constantly adjusting to give you the best possible ride. Although of course, like the Africa Twin, you've got to be prepared to pay a little bit more for it. I think this one comes in with the DCD and electronic suspension at just over 14,000 still for the base model. I should add they've managed to keep the price the same year over year, which I think is impressive considering they've dealt with some of the problems and made some enhancements, although unfortunately this bike is still not available in the US. Now this next bike came up in our adventure list, but I think it's worth including here too, and it's the new Multistrada V2 from KTI. You see, I guess the slightly oversized 19 in front wheel does kind of give it that ever so slight off-road abilities and maybe a bit of the adventure bike handling, but I think apart from that it's basically a direct competitor for stuff like the Tracer 9 and the Tiger Sport 800. It is though a much more spendy option, as you might expect from Ducati, at just shy of 14,000, although it has to be said it has this level of desirability in the looks which you might not necessarily get from one of the other two. For 2025, it gets their completely brand new V2 engine, which replaces the Testastra in the previous generation, and while it's not massively different in terms of performance, it is significantly lighter, which has helped to lighten the whole package, as well as a new aluminium frame. Still, I got to say that price tag does look pretty steep versus the competition, and it looks even more so if you opt for the UPS Spec S version with the semi-active suspension, which comes in at over 16,000. Now KM are still in the thick of it, of trying to secure enough money to keep their business alive, which is a shame because they had some really exciting looking new bikes announced for 2025, including this one. It's the new 1390 version of the Super Juck GT Sports Tourer, which should be an absolute rocket ship, with that big V-twin now getting a ludicrous peak path figure of 188 horsepower peak that easily makes it the most powerful bike on this list, and the rest of the chassis also looks up to spec with top-notch brakes and semi-active suspension courtesy of Brembo and WP, respectively. On top of that, there's the new, more aggressive styling, which I think is a decent improvement, and also some revisions to the tech, which include their new 888 in TFT display, which is absolutely massive, and gets some super whizzy looking new graphics. Hopefully the future of KTM will become much clearer and more certain soon, but in the meantime this is certainly one for the maybe list if you want a really quick sports tour in 2025. That is of course assuming you can afford it. Still, it doesn't even nearly top this list, with the big American style tours generally always being the most expensive of the bunch, perhaps, though BMW interpretations aren't so bad, which come in the form of that R18 platform that had 5 different flavors, and specifically here I'm looking at the R8B Bagger and the R18 Transcontinental Full Tour. Both get updates for the new model year with tweaks to the big one 8L box of twin to make it Euro 5 plus emissions compliant, and once they're at it, they also decided to add a good whack more torque, so it now makes 163 Nm peak, which is I believe 5 Nm up on the last generation. They've also kept them looking a little bit fresh with some new finishes available too. But yeah, what I think is most impressive about them, especially considering how substantial they are, the bikes, is the US pricing, which comes in a lot lower than the competition, presumably in a bid to drive some sales. Take the R8B for example, it's $222,450 in the UK, but in the US, well, the starting price is $2,070. Now of course there are some nuances to the finance of import motorcycles in different countries, but if you do a very simplistic currency conversion, well, that is price into pounds will be the equivalent of $16.99, which seems like an absolute steal. Certainly it's cheaper than Indian's most similar bikes in the Chief and the Roadmaster, which in previous years used their air-cooled Thunderstroke engine to give the maximum character and soul and torque. I guess stricter emissions regulations at the moment, though, and perhaps even changing expectations of performance levels from customers, might have forced their hand, because new for 2025, both bikes now move over to their liquid-cooled Power Plusus engine that was previously built for the Challenger and Pursuit models. That means more performance, certainly in terms of peak power, with now 126 horsepower peak. But it also retains plenty of torque as well, with 181 Nm on tap right in the mid-range at 800 RPM. On top of that, though, both bikes now get a more sporty chassis with the new frame and upside-down fork, and Brembo brakes, and tech has also got a massive boost with a rear-facing radar for blind spot tailgate and rear collision warnings. So yeah, a serious update for these ones, Reb built from the ground up, and while they do look very impressive, I will say they're so similar now to the Challenger and the Pursuit, which were on the Power Plusus platform before them, that it's a little bit difficult to see why they all exist still top in the list. We've got none other than Harley-Davidson. As you might expect, I don't think they're particularly famous for low prices with the new Ultra version of their Street Glide. This one gets pretty much all the same good stuff from the regular Street Glide, like the 117 cubic inch version of the Milwaukee 8V twin bags of comfort from a big cushy chassis, and their later Skyline OS in a massive TFT dash with all the bells and whistles in terms of connectivity and ride. Erase the Ultra suffix, though this Ultra version adds the absolute works in terms of touring comfort. And so with this one you get a top box that integrates the passenger back rest and armrest, as well as a luggage rack, fairing lowers, side case guards, a tall windscreen, and more. So look, undoubtedly it is a lot of money, but then again this one is definitely a lot of bike, and I actually think, especially with the Batwing Fang, which I prefer to the Road Glide, this one looked pretty handsome from the front end, especially in the more blacked out paint jobs. But that completes our run through the new and updated bikes for 2025 on the tourer market. And as always, I'd love to know your pick down in the comments below. Also, I'll leave our adventure list on the screen now, well, in case you haven't seen it already, because naturally adventure bikes also make for great tourists, so there might be some good options in there too. And I'd wholeheartedly recommend hit and subscribe if you want to see more of the latest motorcycle news like this right here on Motobob. A massive thanks for watching today, and we'll see you in the next video.